it's always an interesting balance, isn't it, between demand, customer demand, technology demand, and then actually the skills and talent lag that comes behind that, because ultimately the engineers have got to get experience on it before they've got experience for it.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. Now, the skills and the talent lag, I think it's, the market's just changing. I'm not entirely sure if the market fully understands it yet as well, right? I think, what you need really is just really capable people, that can pick up relatively new platforms and products, because the rate of change, right? There's very few, if any, people who can sort of say, I've like Azure AI Foundry, right? I'm an expert. So how long have you been doing that for?
Welcome to another episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast. Microsoft Mentors is designed to lift the lid on the journeys of the most successful leaders in the Microsoft partner ecosystem. Every week, through candid conversations with founders, business owners, and technology thought leaders, we explore their strategies, grit, and lessons behind their growth, and how they're building competitive advantage for the future. These are the untold stories and practical lessons from leaders who are defining success in Azure, AI, data, app innovation, and security. Our mission is simple: to tell partner stories at scale and create impactful Microsoft conversations.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast. This week I'm really excited to be joined by Tim Callahan from IBM's Microsoft practice. How are you doing this afternoon, Tim? All good?
Yeah, I'm really good, Ollie. Thanks for inviting me onto the show.
No problem at all. And we'll dive into it all in a bit more detail. But one of the reasons that me and Tim connected and thought it'd be cool to get him on the podcast is that there's I guess a new strategy, new approach at IBM, new structure when it comes to your Microsoft practice moving forward. So we can dive into all of what that looks like and get a bit of a feel for what you're seeing on the ground at IBM when it comes to the work that you're doing within the Microsoft ecosystem for customers. But I guess if we start off just to get a bit of a grounding in terms of you and your background, Tim, and I always like to wind it all the way back to where your sort of passion for tech started. So what did that look like for you?
Okay, long history with around Microsoft. I've dedicated pretty much all of my career around Microsoft. It wasn't intentional. It just happened, as things do a lot of the times. I think what really drew me into Microsoft, and I guess as well, it's taken quite a long time to actually realize why I got drawn into Microsoft, as opposed to sort of understanding from the early days. But I took a slightly different sort of path when it came to my career, or at least formal education. So I was one of these folks that sort of was a little bit disenfranchised by the schooling system when I was a kid. I quit sort of college halfway through. Never went to university. So really didn't get sort of formally sort of academically trained and experienced as the sort of the normal path would have been. And instead of that, I went traveling around the world for about the best part of 2 or 3 years, which was great fun. Learned a lot of things, nothing about technology. But I was always pretty adept at technology. My mum herself was very much in the IT game, working for, it was more around hardware back then. But then, so I had quite a lot of experience from what she'd brought home from work. So first PCs and all that kind of stuff. So I was sort of surrounded by technology. So I was naturally drawn towards it. And then, eventually, looking for jobs when I kind of settled back down from traveling and stuff like that, ended up getting, a role locally within Warrington, where I still live today. And it was, I worked for a training company at first, sort of installing PCs and things for people to have to be trained on, pretty sort of like low end stuff. And then I joined a local housing association that had an IT officer role going there. I think, when I look back on sort of my career a little bit, I guess I've had lots and lots of interesting roles, done lots of great big projects in all kinds of varying degrees of size, scale, and complexity and impact. but it's the people that I've met along the way that have kind of made the difference, right? So it's the peers and the mentors that I've had over the period of time. So if I think about when I joined the housing association, it's probably about 21 years old. Met a chap called Alan Coleman, and he was really passionate about technology, and I didn't even really had a huge passion for technology. I was interested, but I didn't realize that technology could be fun. And by meeting him and going on like a 12-month journey with him, kind of put the fun into IT, and then I really, started gravitating towards that.
It's so important early on in your career journey as well, isn't it? To have that mentor that can, because like you say, when you come in from like yourself traveling and you're 21 and ultimately you're probably feeling a little bit like, oh, finished me traveling now I've got to get a job. To have someone that can, I guess, give you a bit of a steer and a bit of direction and really turn what is an interest into something that's going to become a long-term career. It's super, super useful. And like you say, it's all about the people side of it as much as it is the technology early on in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a similar theme all the way through, right? From the housing association where we had a single server stuffed under a desk somewhere, and I learned that IT was fun. And then eventually ended up at a local organisation, which used to be Virgin Media, it's Telewest Broadband. As a chap that I was brought in to actually replace, and I now work with a chap called Dave Brannan, who was a guy who sort of architected this massive Exchange server platform to serve around about 2 million mailbox users for the ISP mailbox on Blue Yonder, or Telewest as it was. And it was the first time I'd really seen Microsoft do something at such a huge, gigantic scale. And this predated sort of like x64 technology as well. So, the memory space was limited. And it was just, and that then was the platform, because I'd done this really massive thing with Microsoft. That then I got into consulting, met this chap called Al Hughes at Computer Center. He saw the sort of like raw engineering me, but he saw that actually I was pretty good sort of client facing, could do consulting. He sort of took me under his wing, and I went from Computer Centers to Dimension Data to CSC, and I followed this chap called Al all the way through. He's an incredible mentor and sort of helped me with the sort of the psychology of like customer value and people leadership. And from there, I got to Avanade. Avanade was brilliant. I had a sort of 10-year stint at Avanade, wall-to-wall Microsoft, never any sort of, you didn't have to sell internally before you sold to the clients kind of thing. It was just, it was a brilliant place. And I met a bunch of guys there as well that I'm still really good friends with today. We go away for weekends now and again and stuff like that. And again, that little mentor peer group between sort of like engineering, one of them was like really sort of commercial, security, just a really great group of guys that allowed me to sort of like ride the next sort of wave of my career. And they all added something to me, if you know what I mean. And then IBM turned up. At first, initially, I was a little bit confused why IBM wanted to hire me.
It doesn't feel like the natural home necessarily from the outside in for a through and through career Microsoft man, does it?
No, I agree. And then, but there's this chap. He was my predecessor, a guy called Chris Gates. Fabulous guy. And he joined IBM with this sort of mission through a colleague that he'd worked with in the past around, how can we sort of bring the best of Microsoft and the best of IBM and sort of change the world? He was a real sort of passionate believer in sort of changing the world. He did a good job on me as well in terms of, selling me the vision. And I came on board. I came on board as a CTO at first. And then he sort of moved on to another role a little bit later. And then I took over the helm. But yeah, the mission really is to combine both of these organizations, sort of get them to see eye to eye, and just create sort of great value and solutions for the for the clients. And there's a culture and DNA within IBM that when you mix it with the kind of brilliance of the Microsoft stack, that it's it provides excellent value. And I was talking, just a final point on this, and I think this is the bit, when I went back before around not having any formal training, I learned everything about Microsoft just through curiosity. And I think the bit that I love about Microsoft is it just lowers the barrier to entry into technology just enough for someone who's not necessarily formally trained to go and create insane value for organizations, people, personally, however you want to do it. And that's what I love about the Microsoft platform. It can be infinitely complex in the background if you want to do some really complex stuff, but that entry to value is so low, and I think that's where they differentiate to other organisations, and it's in their culture to do that, and that's what's propelled my career really.
Yeah, well, especially now as well. If you think about what you were doing, and it was still a low tech barrier to entry then, but you now look at low code, no code, empowered platform, virtual agents. You can go and build super powerful technology solutions with fairly limited technical understanding of what's happening in the back end. When you scale that out to enterprise, there's obviously a lot more complexities. But if I wanted to go in now into my M365 subscription, I can start doing stuff and making things happen. And yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think the age-old story is this mid-80s power dynamic between Microsoft and IBM and Apple and the whole sort of personal computer war that was happening. But I think if you look at where the whole industry has got to now, that cross collaboration between the massive tech companies. When you look at Linux and Microsoft, and Mac integration on Windows operating system integration onto Mac devices, obviously what you guys are doing at IBM, that sort of really steel wall between these big organizations is definitely lowered now, and it's all about collaboration and ultimately using the power of both organizations or all the organizations in the mix to advance the solution for the customer. So I guess with when you initially joined IBM, what was the sort of the landscape when it came to the Microsoft practice, the Microsoft strategic relationship? What did that look like at the start for you when you joined?
Okay, yeah. So as you just pointed out, then right, there's Microsoft and IBM have been partners, but also over probably the best part of 40 years, I'd probably loosely describe them as frenemies. They do work together, but at the same time, very competitive. And don't get me wrong, there still is a competitive nature. That our organisation splits into two sections. One is the technology side, which is where all of our software and sort of infrastructure business sits, like mainframes, etc. And then there's a consulting side, which does work very closely with technology, but then also works with a vast strategic partner ecosystem, which includes AWS, Google, Salesforce, SAP. Keep on going, right? But Microsoft's one of our main, strategic partners. So when I got here, IBM had been going through a bit of a transition. They'd obviously gone from a new CEO, Ginny, to Arvind. Arvind was kind of at the helm, also of at least the orchestrator of the Red Hat acquisition. And then with that Red Hat acquisition, IBM effectively became a sort of a very partner-centric organization overnight, because Red Hat was such a crown jewel for them. And I think that was the catalyst that meant that we needed to create relationships specifically with the hyperscalers. So they started to form this strategic partner businesses, as it's called, with say Microsoft AWS, and they brought in my predecessor Chris, as I mentioned before. But we still had very fragmented sort of capability. We had some Microsoft capability in our security business. We had our organization was set up into sort of the more sort of business transformation side of consulting services, where we had some Microsoft capability. Then we had our sort of what we call our hybrid cloud business consulting services, and there's some Microsoft capability. Yeah, so we had this fragmented sort of capability, and it wasn't just capability; it was also the mission. What we were trying to do. My role at first was kind of an influencer. It was almost like trying to get the pockets to consolidate the journey to provide that value to our clients, and it was quite challenging because there's different organizations with different missions. So very, very, very complex in the GSI, as you'd imagine. But this recent move towards the Microsoft practice, we've now consolidated our Microsoft business in what is called hybrid cloud and data. Does a little bit more than just that, but it was we could only give it three words as a name. So we've got all of our Microsoft capability under a single roof. That also means we look after all of the offerings, the partnership, as well as the people. So it's kind of that one-stop shop. So I'd say we've gone from having a business with a veneer of Microsoft around it to sort of having Microsoft in the core. We've effectively set up a business group, a little bit like our competition have done in the past as well. We've not called it a business group, we call it practice, but for all intents, it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, and has that meant that there's been some internal restructure? So like those Microsoft security skills that were in a separate team, and the the other Microsoft skills in another team, are they all now underneath one collective working together towards, like you say, that sort of joint mission?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, I think the what I've seen as well in terms of a major sort of behaviour change is now that we've actually done this, and it's seen as more of a formal thing, sort of almost like a blueprint part of the organisation. My last 2 to 3 years has been about, again, because we're a complex GSI. We have to sell to our account teams before we effectively sell to the clients. It's almost like, they need to understand the value, the value prop, what the conversations they're going to have with their clients, because we don't necessarily own the client relationships directly. So we need to go through those first. And we've gone from sort of canvassing to try to influence now to sort of being this blueprint part of the organization. And we're now a front door to everything that's relevant to the client where they're invested in Microsoft. And the door's like, it's fallen off its hinges now because of just, within the space of a couple of months, all of that traffic is now being directed towards our new Microsoft practice. So it's getting very busy. It's putting a lot of demands on the team. So we're having to adjust what we do. And there's just so much more activity around enabling all of the accounts and growing out the accounts.
Yeah. I guess it just that, having that central source of truth and central sort of hub hive mindset for everything Microsoft focused at IBM. You think about it from the the customer side of things, that they're all flowing through into one central practice and then being managed within that. And obviously IBM have had a few sort of fairly high profile acquisitions over the years in the cloud space, like Nord Cloud and others. So are they embedded into, if they've got Microsoft skills, are they embedded into this practice? Do they still sort of sit out in their own organization and collaborate through? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. So we there's a lot of acquisitions, right? And not just in the Microsoft space. We've done quite a few in the Oracle space recently as well, and similar, sort of initial challenges. So the acquisitions don't sit directly within the practice. They're still their own sort of entity and organization. However, because of the consolidation of a single practice within the IBM side, means that our acquisition partners, let's call them, or our acquisition businesses, Nord Cloud, Nudesic, Boxbow, Tau, Blue Tab, keep on going. There's a few more as well, right? Apologies if I missed any off. Because we've got the central core within the one place in IBM, it does mean now that it's less of a matrix and it's easy to bring them closer. So in a previous world, to say bring our European organization for cloud delivery, Nord Cloud in, I'd have to sort of do plumbing across the business. Now we just need to do plumbing effectively the Microsoft story directly within us. So it's easier to, I wouldn't call it control, but it's just easier to collaborate and work together. So we're getting very much more ingrained. The future might be different. I don't know. I'm not part of that side of the business in terms of how we sort of fully set up operationally. But day one Microsoft practice, our Nord Cloud business, led by a chap called Andy Walker, we've agreed that we sort of work very closely together. He's got leads within his team to work within my team, keep that mesh, because, we want to be working from a single pipeline, single opportunity, single client base. They'll still do some of their own thing. They do some direct to market type stuff. But as long as we're integrated, and I think, so you're not getting two versions of the story, right? You're just getting that single one.
Yeah. You don't really end up getting all the way through sort of a bid proposal process with the same customer and both pop up and go, "Oh, hi Andy." Oh, we're both.
We tend not to do that. We're definitely better on that front, but it's just all of the other stuff, right, around go to market offerings, and people and capability, right? So it's avoiding the duplication of learning and knowledge programs and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think there's a bit in the sort of the press release that you shared about the new practice that really jumped out at me. And it's this whole concept of moving from idea to impact faster.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit of background in terms of your thought process about that idea and what that actually looks like in practice and reality for you and the Microsoft practice at IBM.
Yeah. So again, the consolidation is allowing us to have sort of more direct control over in effect how we go to market. And then when we do go to market, it's within the same walls, but we can cover all of the sort of Microsoft solution areas, right? So almost rarely now do we have something that just sits directly within the one solution area, right? You'll have a mixture of business applications and data, then maybe a bit of Azure, possibly a bit of modern work, and always going to have security. I think by having all of those housed in all the talent and capability and go to market within a single place, just means that there's a openness and transparency layer between the entire team. So when clients engage and account teams engage with their clients, they get the consolidated view of all of that. So we're able to sort of bring the entire sort of journey together much more quickly with an increased impact, because in the past it would have been a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from there, 10 different solutions, refine it into what, it's just so difficult. So I think having it all under the one roof is just providing that sort of holistic value to our clients, and allows us to innovate, a bit quicker, allows us to work and partner with Microsoft deeper, quicker, and IBM have also been on a bit of a journey in the last 18 months where we're trying to pivot our own business into what we call an asset-based consulting, where we in effect have our same consulting workforce, but our growth engine is by by creating digital sort of AI-driven assets that allow us to do more with clients with the same group of people, but grow the business. And again, by having our consolidated practice, both in the UK, but all the way up to the global sort of organization, it means innovation is happening quicker, investments coming quicker. We're generating, growing loads more assets that are then being plumbed into sort of our delivery platform to plug in some of those Microsoft-based relevant assets that our clients want.
Yeah. And I guess during the process of doing all of this, there's changes to, I guess, where people sit within the business and maybe some of their sort of day-to-day roles and responsibilities. So I guess, were there any challenges on that sort of integration piece of actually building the team and bringing it together and actually getting it on that collective journey forward? Because you're ultimately building a new culture in itself within IBM, aren't you, with that practice?
Yep. There's been a lot of change, and we're still going through a little bit of that change as well, right? It's only been relatively recent. Albeit I lead the practice in the UKI. I need a lot of help. There's a lot that sits below both, operationally, go to market, partnership. As I said before. So it's a case of identifying people who have wanted to get involved. I think my own style is I tend not to. Well, I say tend not to. I'm probably terrible as well at micromanagement. I like to work with people who effectively buy into the vision, understand the vision, and kind of go do it. It's people who are really bought in. Now we're a consulting organization, so we also have limited amounts of time. A lot of us still have to be very sort of client-centric, client-focused. We're an organization fueled by our people and revenue. So a lot of people's time has to be focused on, doing exactly that, right? So then how do you sort of grow, and support a practice at the same time? So, some of my job is to try to help, create the conditions for that to happen. But then at some times as well, there's a lot of people who are really passionate about what we do, who effectively sort of carve up the small amount of time that they've got left to sort of like give back to the organization as well, because they believe in what we're trying to do, specifically around that sort of IBM Microsoft story. So I get a lot of help, a lot of enthusiasm, people who want to get involved and really want to double down on what it is we're trying to achieve.
I think ultimately, by being invested and supporting with the wider objective, that's going to create more opportunity for everyone within the practice and their own careers within it, isn't it? So
absolutely.
And you mentioned there, obviously, as a practice, it's still revenue driven and consulting focused. So I guess if we dive into, what you're seeing from demand in terms of IBM customers and the types of conversations that you guys are having, where are the sort of the key growth areas that you see? We're obviously about to come into a new Microsoft financial year as well. What technology is everyone talking about? I can take a guess at probably what ones you're going to say.
Yeah. Well, even that particular flavor of that technology, right? It's not AI, it's agentic AI, right? That's the that's the main one. Look, I mean, it's again the growth in terms of percentage digits growth is obviously highest in the AI space, and to some extent data as well, because they're kind of a bit symbiont. I'd argue there's still a lot of kind of core work there that's probably the slightly, I say, less interesting. I mean, I love a good DC exit at the best of days, right?
Yeah. It doesn't get the big headlines, does it, though?
But it doesn't. But the size of those deals are still eye water revenue worthy, right? So it's so. And it aligns with Microsoft's sales model as well, right? I mean, they're probably going to change it in the next sort of couple of months as they relaunch, but I'd be very surprised if they take their focus off migrations, right? That's their number one sort of revenue generator in terms of getting workloads onto cloud, and we're here for it as well. We've won plenty of deals in the sort of infrastructure and sort of migrate and move space, across Microsoft and some of our other ecosystem partners as well. So I think, albeit it's a little bit, not quite as, tantalizing as AI is, there's still a lot left to do there for sure. Especially around the kind of post move to cloud and that sort of modernize on cloud journey, that there's still so much of that, to be done, which is great. And I think it's a good timing as well, because as they modernize, they can now bring the AI journey into those. So I think we'll see this perfect sort of storm of clients wanting to modernize apps, but bringing AI in at the same time, and you'll see both sort of explode because of it. But then obviously AI, just in terms of from nothing to a massive $5 trillion business by 2030, whatever it is, that is where a lot of the mind share is at the moment, right? There's nobody who's not talking about AI at the moment, for sure.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover between the public discourse and reality when public cloud and hyperscalers were coming to market and getting market share, 2010 to 2015 and onwards. I remember it being very similar, this whole conversation around public cloud first, all in cloud. That was a lot of the actual narrative out in the public discourse. Everything's got to be PaaS. Let's look at cloud native, containerization, blah, blah, blah. And fast forward 10 years later, 2025, and there's still organizations that are still sat in massive data centers and still going through their first migration to public cloud. I think the rate of innovation is obviously going to be quicker with AI, but I think that disparity between what everyone's talking about as sort of big sky thinking versus in reality what is being deployed into production environments and enterprise organizations, there's going to be a big difference still between the two. And I guess with IBM, obviously IBM have got their own AI tool in Watson X, is it?
Yep.
So do you ever come across any sort of conflict or, what's the relationship look like when you're talking to customers about advising them on the Microsoft AI stack, whether it's IBM, whether it's third-party AI? What does that sort of interaction look like?
I thought we'd take a very quick break from this week's episode of Microsoft Mentors the podcast to just talk a little bit about why the podcast and the community that it serves is so important to us as part of our purpose here at Cloud Decisions and the purpose it drives within the wider Microsoft ecosystem. We've been involved here at Cloud Decisions in the Microsoft ecosystem for over a decade now, working with Microsoft partners and businesses with strong alignment to Microsoft technologies and their technology teams to help them to grow and scale their teams in cloud, security, data, and AI. For the past year, we've been working really hard behind the scenes to develop 2 core talent solutions that are built with our customers in mind and enable Microsoft aligned businesses to access the talent they need to grow and scale their teams and ultimately hit their business objectives. We've developed CDX, our own proprietary talent intelligence system that uses custom AI, large language models and natural language processing to enable you as an organization, as a technology leader, to make insight-led technology decisions on all of your permanent hires and gives us the data that we really need to take your role to market to execute the search. We've also been working with customers here in the UK and in the US through Global Source,
our global talent solution that is built to enable organizations to build borderless technology teams for permanent, contract, and flexible outsourced resources. So if you're a Microsoft partner or you are a technology leader within a business with a strong Microsoft technology alignment, and you'd like to know a little bit more about how CDX could fuel your permanent hires or how Global Source could offer you a global talent strategy, then feel free to reach out. And now let's get back to this week's episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast.
Yeah, there is some crossover, as you'd imagine. When I go back to my old days in Dimension Data, Dimension Data were a Cisco house, and I was there trying to effectively provide consulting services for, I think it was called, it wasn't Skype by then. I think it was still called Office Communications Server, maybe release 2, maybe back then, in a Cisco world. So,
showing your age there, Tim.
yeah, I know. I go back to LCS actually before it even got named to OCS, but there you go. So the there's overlap, right? As I said, our business splits into technology and consulting. Consulting effectively turns up with a point of view. So it's kind of my job in a lot of ways to make sure that our technology leadership gets the same mind share as all of the other technologies. So our account teams and our technologists within the account teams need to be as well versed in Bedrock as they are in Copilot and OpenAI, as they are in Watson X and et cetera, keep going on, right? It's important that we acknowledge kind of where our clients are, and if our clients are gravitating to a certain platform, then we go do that. So in a sense, we rely on the addressable market that Microsoft itself creates. We don't necessarily specifically go out there and try to, in effect, make the client choose Microsoft first. But that's the same in terms of every other technology, right? We will have those conversations and discussions. And there are parts of our business, which is the non-consulting side, which is obviously going to markets across all clients to try to talk about, to talk about Watson and Watson X. Watson's it's a great platform. I think what's great about it is in a lot of ways it's incredibly turnkey. So it's something, and it's turnkey. It's it's multi-cloud. It's turnkey, and it can also be used in a hybrid cloud, right? So it's got a uniqueness a little bit about it, which has got a real sweet spot. I'd argue in some ways some of our clients are still sort of embarking on that journey, so they're probably less in the space to fully sort of need all of that kind of multi-cloud hybrid demand at the moment. A lot of organizations really are just trying to spin stuff up to try to prove, to prove the value. And that's where Microsoft and AWS and Google are, really strong contenders. So yeah, there's some overlap. Sometimes I think, again, based on just the maturity or enablement status of a particular account, they might lead in a particular direction in the first place. But we tend to course correct really quickly based on where the client's going. And we just need to acknowledge that, and we do, that, all of our hyperscale partners and ecosystem partners, they've all got their own relationships with our clients. And in a lot of cases, they may even have deeper or higher relationships than us as well, depending on where the buyers are coming from within the organization. And they're incredibly influential. So it's important, again, across that entire spectrum, that we maintain, relationships with all of the partners to ensure that we have the right intel. We know, where the clients are spending the money, where they've got the commitments, because commitments are quite important as well in the sort of, the Microsoft space with the MACs and the commit to consume agreements. If they've got commit to consume agreements, then, we need to go down a certain path. But then, we need to make sure that our account teams are aware of those MACs, the technologies, the landscape. So yeah, it's massively fluid. Sometimes sometimes the wrong conversation might happen, based on where the client's going. But, it's on us to effectively understand where the clients are going with their choices. And then sometimes, the client turns around and says, help us decide. And then, we do then turn up as a consulting team, prior to getting to my team, and actually, have a real sort of strategic think around, which platforms are the best suited for their journey. So yeah, we're highly opinionated. And when it gets to me, it's usually because the client's indicated or made that decision, or we've got a strong feeling that it's going to go the Microsoft way.
Yeah. So at an IBM level, it's all about going in, consulting, understanding the customer, what technology solution is right for them across the different partners and vendors that IBM work with, making sure it fits the use case ultimately for what the customer wants. And then as that develops and is pushing probably down the Microsoft route, then you're there and your team's there with the capability to come in and deliver it for the customer. Yeah. Cool. And I guess on the sort of outside from, away from the sort of the pure AI side of things, I know you mentioned the data side being extrinsically linked there, and I've definitely seen that probably over the last 6 to 9 months. The demand for data platform skills has just grown exponentially, and obviously that is a lot of it is fueled by, it's really the key that unlocks a lot of AI innovation, right? So I guess on that sort of journey, if you've got organizations that ultimately want to get towards AI as their end goal, but maybe on the data side, they're just nowhere near mature enough. What are the sort of steps that those organizations can start to take to get them closer to where they want to try and get to?
Yeah, agreed. So, we're all talking at the moment kind of around sort of like, data products, right? Almost, the data products as a service layer to fuel all of these kind of AI type applications that we're trying to sort of to drive. I feel a little sorry for pretty much all organizations, because I think the industry over the last 20 years has gone through about 40 different flavors of how you should architect and what you should do with your data, and it seems to not be stopping. It has got better over the years, but it's incredibly difficult to sort of maintain that integrity that they're looking for, the agility that they're looking for, while keeping everything under lock and key, making sure sensitive information isn't available, ensuring that the consumers of the data can use it in the ways. I think it's almost an impossible task, and it's the FOMO of AI is kind of just lit an even bigger fire underneath that, to be honest with you. So I look at one of we're a Microsoft Fabric launch partner when it launched last year, and I think it's a fantastic product, and I think it's potentially one of the sort of real big game changing future products for Microsoft. I think because of that sort of architecture fatigue, I think in my view, I think the data world has kind of sort of responded to it as that looks cool, but a bit of a groan, because do we have to redo it again? Do we, am I going to have to go, do we have to reorganize?
We just put Databricks in 2 years ago.
Yeah. And, Databricks is still super relevant, right? It's, but I just think, Fabric's just, it's that SaaS one-stop shop for all things data. It will allow, nimble organizations that need to be able to create data products for whatever use cases they need them for very, very quickly, and all at the same time while maintaining a lot of security and being able to ingest and integrate, remote data sources as that kind of sort of like front window for all things data. I do not, sort of underestimate how difficult it would be for an organization that's so deeply wedded in Snowflake or Databricks to suddenly go, right, okay, let's go and do it this way. I think, so there's a course that certain organizations are going on, and obviously Microsoft supports Snowflakes on Azure, Databricks on Azure, etc. Right? So, but yeah, I think it's there's a lot of change coming in data, and I think that sense of urgency for agility will eventually push either the products or the platform choices in a certain way. But I still think it's a little unclear at the moment.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm seeing, it's the same when any sort of big new technology comes out within the Microsoft product sets, is around Fabric there is a demand there. There's a need for organizations to be able to deliver it, but on the flip side, there's a big skills gap. Whilst a lot of the pillars within Fabric are, wider data engineering skills within the Azure data product set, there's still a big gap in terms of the people that have done big enterprise scale Fabric migrations or deployments, because the projects in the real world haven't quite caught up yet. So I'm finding it quite a lot where I've got, our clients saying, let's go to market. We need a data engineer. We want someone that's got, production experience deploying Fabric. And I'm like, well, 99% of people that I'm talking to have done it in POC, but haven't actually quite deployed it in anger yet. So it's always an interesting balance, isn't it, between demand, customer demand, technology demand, and then actually the skills and talent lag that comes behind that, because ultimately the engineers have got to get experience on it before they've got experience for it.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. Now, the skills and the talent lag, I think it's, the market's just changed. I'm not entirely sure if the market fully understands it yet as well, right? I think, what you need really is just really capable people, that can pick up relatively new platforms and products, because the rate of change, right? There's very few, if any, people who can sort of say, I've like Azure AI Foundry, right? I'm an expert. It's like, how long have you been doing that for? Well, it's only been out for best part, well, it's been renamed from Studio to Foundry, right? But, and there's a lineage in terms of how they've got to that product. But then at the same time, right, is what you need is like really capable people. So, and I think that's why you're probably seeing, you've seen a lot of data scientists, data engineers sort of moving into the AI space, because there's an affinity towards, kind of what they're doing and trying to what they're achieving. Infrastructure folks, I'd argue they're probably under a bit of pressure at the moment. I'm again generally from an infrastructure background. We're having to learn new skills, new experiences. But again, I think that's where Microsoft helps out. The barrier to entry is just that little bit, that little bit lower. Fabric versus doing something in, Databricks, right? You're going to get that full end-to-end experience in Fabric. It's going to be a bit less challenging because there's less plumbing to do, less infrastructure to build out. So it allows people to sort of get on that journey pretty quicker. But yeah, I think skills, it used to be that we always used to like have this like bullet point list of, needs X years, this year's, that year's, and I don't know, it just doesn't necessarily seem to fit. It's almost like you need an aptitude test for how transferable a person is into the next wave.
Yeah, it's like Copilot Studio, as an example. Like, we've worked on a few requirements with our customers that are looking for Copilot Studio, and actually, it's like, well, what are the baseline skills that someone has to come from? Well, a lot of the time, it's sort of this blend between Power Platform skills, some SharePoint skills, some N365 skills, and almost finding these blended skill sets that then can plug into a role that's going to be focused down the line in Copilot Studio. And what's your thoughts, Tim, on the sort of the disaster scenario where everyone's job in IT is going to be wiped out by AI in the next 5 years? But what's your thoughts in terms of the reality of that happening? What percentage of it might happen?
Yeah, I think obviously the industry is going through some shifts as well, right? There's Microsoft that really let a bunch of folks go only a couple of days ago, actually. They've gone through a couple of rounds of it. No organizations sort of are immune to that. So I think there's always going to be cost factors for sure. And it might sound a little bit of a sort of slightly cliche answer, but, I do think AI is doing two things. It's allowing us to do more. So theoretically, when you can do more, you theoretically might need less people, but it's a case of, are we going to create the same value with less people, or are we going to create more value, with the same amount of people? I generally think in the sort of commercial space and, competitiveness space, organizations are compelled to do more because, sometimes it's a bit of a race to the bottom, but I actually think it ultimately will be a race to the top. So I think at least for the next, sort of wave, we will see some cost pressures happening within organizations and jobs being taken over and certain tasks and certain things not necessarily being, available. Grads are probably, potentially a difficult area because we've got agents and copilots that can kind of do that, grad work, stuff. But I think it evolves the grad. I think we are at the kind of a bit of an inflection point around what do we do and what is it going to do? And I think there's a lot of volatility globally at the moment. So there's a little bit of, unsured feet around where to put them next. But I think we will move towards create more value with the same amount of people. And that means more skills, more, reliance on AI. Because I think it is more about the value play. I think longer term, it's a little bit potentially a little bit difficult. I think we will see that erosion of, typical labor. And I don't think it's just, IT. I think it's every single thing, across the entirety of, the human landscape. You look at Jason Huang and bringing robots on stage and training LLMs to navigate the physical world, right? We are on that path. And I think, one of my favorite books that I read, Microsoft's AI CEO or lead AI guy, Mustafa Suleyman, wrote a book called The Coming Wave. I recommend it to everybody. I don't get any royalties for it. And I think him and his colleague, I forget his colleague's name, might come to me. It sort of really describes that sort of narrow path around, not doing and doing, and the regulatory nature of it, and stifling innovation. I think it's a real narrow path that you have to weave. But the one thing that is certain, it's almost like, it is almost like an AI singularity at the end of it, right? It's creating a gravity that's drawing us towards it, and it's pretty unstoppable. And that's the bit. So, how do we course correct as we go along that path, knowing that we're going to be continually drawn towards that AI singularity? Unless there's like a real massive international geopolitical pushback on AI where it's regulated globally, I just can't see it happening. There's too many disparate forces in the world that is always going to be trying to race towards that technological revolution to gain a geopolitical advantage over the world. I think it's just the nature of human beings. It's a bit scary, really, but no. So I think we're on the path.
We're all doing it, and it's Terminator.
I mean,
Terminator is coming.
I don't know. Sky. You know what? Skynet is a possibility. I don't know. I have some faith in humanity. A lot of faith in humanity, actually. I think we'll do the right thing. I'm a little bit more sort of Gene Roddenberry-esque than I am any kind of dystopian view of the world. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of turbulence, and we've seen it happen in the past with industry in the UK. We're going to see it on a global scale. I think even potentially things like some of the the traditional outsourcing nations will potentially suffer quite a bit as well, just because AI is potentially going to be cheaper than offshoring labor elsewhere. You're going to get digital labor arbitrage. So yeah, it's going to impact the entire industry, and I think it will happen quickly. Maybe not necessarily that quick. We can't keep up. I still think change takes a little bit of time.
Yeah. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier about that, public discourse conversation versus reality and what's happening on the ground in organisations, isn't it? And how fast can they actually realistically get to those sort of points? And again, there's lots of similarities between that shift from traditional on-premise infrastructure where everyone was a Windows Server engineer or a networking engineer doing Cisco switches and routers, and that now I'm transitioning into being more cloud-based roles. Again, I think the rate of innovation and change of AI will accelerate beyond what we've seen with public cloud. But what we've seen with public cloud is people that were infrastructure engineers became Azure cloud engineers, and a lot of the manual tasks that they used to do is now done for infrastructure as code and pipelines. So we have seen similar things happen before, and the market adjusts and finds out where the value of having the human in there is. And I think you're right, we'll end up with this balance of artificial intelligence and human intelligence, and how do you use both of them to drive ultimately as much value as possible for customers.
I think it's you can compare it a little bit to cloud. I think I think cloud provided an advantage. I think and it might sound a little dramatic, but I actually think failure to, or reluctance to go down the AI journey is potentially sort of a path to sort of obsolescence. It's and that's the difference with cloud, right? I think lots of people took the advantages of what cloud brought. Great, bit more nimbleness, but I think the revolution that AI is bringing, I think there's a real need for everybody to go down the path, because if they don't, I really think it's almost like comparing it to technologies of the past where civilizations were wiped out, that kind of level. And I think that's how strong a case AI is making, and we're still, I think we're still early. We're really early. Albeit, we're
maybe a good analogy, because it's about how do you compare against, if you take two identical organizations and one is leveraging AI and one isn't, which one is going to scale faster, grow faster, be able to innovate, be able to drive more revenue? It's almost like, let's go back hundreds of years. You've got two newspaper distributors. One is using the printing press and one is using typewriters to write out every single newspaper. The guys that won that were the guys that used the printing press, right? So I guess it's probably similar sort of scenario to that. In that
printing press is a good example for sure.
Yeah, you'll have similar competitors that are on a level playing field now, and the ones that innovate and take advantage of the technology advantages they can get through AI will be the ones that rise to the top.
Yeah, and I think right now, and I think this is where maybe some of the skepticism and sort of hype, Gartner hype graph or whatever it's called, comes out, is that because we are early, the differentiator between those doing and those not doing is maybe not that great right now. But fast forward 12 months, 18 months, and if you're still sort of sleeping at the wheel a little bit and someone's making great strides, that's where we'll start to see huge differences between, competitiveness, products, evolution. I think it's and it'll happen really quickly when it does happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess generally then for, you and your team at IBM, what's the next sort of 12 to 18 months look like? If you look back in, end of 2026, what would a success look like for you guys?
Yeah. Okay. So I think as a business, we've done well in a lot of areas. I think there's, areas we can do, sort of penetrate the market a little bit more. That's what we're after. I think, and using this shift to the Microsoft practice to making sure that we capture the entire market. Again, I think, Microsoft create this, undoubtedly massive market in the addressable market where we operate, especially in the enterprise space. And I think we'll just see more attention sort of focusing that way as our team sort of creates more influence and enablement across even wider parts and deeper parts of our business, as well as bringing the partnership in. And I think it'll always be steeped in the IBM culture of, IBM is kind of get out of bed to sort of make the world a better place, and Microsoft make products to try and make the world and everybody a better place. And I think combination, it sounds a bit cheesy, but you bring those two together. We do some really awesome stuff, and it's fueled by a culture of wanting to make the world better, not just trying to solve tricky problems, right? It's really about trying to do right by the world. So I think we'll see more of that. I think the case studies that come out of if anything, next 12 months to 18 months, I think some of the public facing things that we publish in the IBM Microsoft space, I'm really hoping that's going to sort of make the industry and our clients sort of ears perk up a little bit in terms of what we're achieving with each other. IBM's brilliant, but I just think that IBM and Microsoft combination, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. We'll catch up again at the end of 2026 and see how it's all going.
Yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope I've not been replaced by an AI bot. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'll be talking to AI Tim by then. But no, really enjoyed that. Great to hear a little bit more about what you guys are doing. I always like to close the podcast, Tim, with Microsoft Mentors quickfire round. So you're ready for a few quickfire questions?
We shall see.
Yeah, we shall see. There's nothing too stressful in there. So let's start off with, and I always like to see what different people answer for this. But if you had to pick one, what was your favourite Microsoft product or product set of all time?
Yeah, I'm probably going to have to go with, it sounds pretty bad, but Microsoft Office. I think Microsoft Office and its evolution through to M365, I can't think of a single technology that enables individuals to be able to do more with their own personal and work lives. I think it's, there's always been a choice between like Windows, Mac, etc. But I just think the Office platform and how it's evolved over time, and then it became more online and SharePoint and OneDrive. I think OneDrive was initially developed by Ray Ozzie, who came from Lotus Notes around sync technology and stuff like that, right? I just think that product suite that we still all use every single day to create value for each other, for our clients. Sounds a bit dull with the age of AI, right? But I honestly, I can't think of a single product that's encapsulated the vision of enabling people to do more at scale.
Yeah, 100%. Well, my next one was going to be, what's one Microsoft product that you use day to day that you couldn't live without? But I think we know the answer.
I mean, you kind of. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm a little bit of a PowerPoint jockey these days, rather than someone who's in Visio all the time. Just the nature of the evolution of the job. Listen, I think, and we've not really touched on it, to be honest with you, but Copilot, and all of the other LLM stuff. I do use a bit of OpenAI, ChatGPT as well. But I think it's essential to not keep ahead, but to keep in touch with where the world's going, is to be using this stuff. I think, the value play around Copilot, and again, there's a bit of skepticism about just ticking the box and enabling it. There's a real point where when you start to use it, you use it almost as your first step. Composing emails. I wouldn't necessarily say creating PowerPoint decks at the moment. It's not quite there yet, but it will. And it's only as bad as it'll ever get. It'll only ever get better. But I just think using the AI tools almost as that first point of call. I find I achieve more, do more because I'm using Copilot and using ChatGPT, right? I think it's
Satya Nadella said it, didn't he? I can't remember if it was at Ignite or something else. It was like, you should never start with a blank page ever again.
Yeah,
I
agree.
That's the thought process, isn't it?
I just, an idea pops into, 6 months ago, an idea would pop into my head, and I'd have a quick qualification process in my head around, do I have the time and energy to be able to bring it to life? And quite often the answer would be no. Now an idea pops into my head. It's actually, I could probably take that to the first stage within, a couple of minutes, and then see if it's worthwhile putting more energy and time into, right? It's a real massive game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. And on a sort of a personal tech level, can you remember what was the first ever tech gadget that you got?
Well, I inherited one of my mum's PCs that she brought back from one of the organisations she's working for. I think it's called System House at the time. It wasn't mine at the time, but I did break it quite a bit, and then I was under a bit of pressure to fix it. So that's where I probably learned my first sort of support jobs and stuff like that around fixing stuff that are broke. So yeah, that was probably my first gadget.
Yeah, and last one. If you didn't end up in tech, what else do you think you would have been doing?
No,
footballer?
No,
president?
I'll be honest with you. I've absolutely no idea. Absolutely no idea. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was a kid. I fell on my feet, landed in IT. I was pretty good at it. I found a platform that enabled me to be even better at it, and I've never looked back. So yeah, it's really difficult to anticipate.
No, awesome. Well, I will. When the podcast goes out, I will make sure that Tim and IBM and his team are tagged in it on LinkedIn. As always, you can find us on LinkedIn Live, on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. But Tim, thanks very much for your time. It's been really interesting to learn a bit more about your journey and what you guys have been up to. I'll catch you again soon.
Cheers, Ollie.